All right. We are already underway. Didn't even give us a countdown, but that's all right. What is up, everybody? Welcome to episode 20 of the Designated Players Podcast. We got the board updated, and we are here with a very special guest, Cory from Rams Review Podcast for Derby County. How are you doing, man?
Andrew, Connor, thanks for having me on. Yeah, it's I'm doing all right, all things considered. In the my microcosm of the season that is Derby County, it is the season that continually and perpetually doesn't seem like it's going to end. We've got 6 big games coming up now for the end of the season, but it's off the field stuff and everything in between that keeps us as a podcast and keeps us as a fan not only continuing to create great content for our podcast, but also continuing to chew the nails. To wake up at 2:00 in the morning in cold sweats, not knowing if we're gonna have a football club to support next year. So yeah, it's all happening, but it's glorious to be with you guys. Thank you so much for having me on.
So it is Derby. It's not Derby.
It is. Yes. Okay.
So that has always been obviously one of the things.
It's fine. I was on a Sheffield United podcast and started calling them Sheffield Wednesday. So shows how professional sometimes I can be, on our stuff. And I was like 45 minutes. The guy's like, it's Sheffield United. I was like, that's what I've been saying. And he's like, no, that's not what you were saying. I was like, well, sorry. He's like, yeah, we hate those guys. I was like, yep, my apologies.
That is super funny. Funny enough, when United went up to the Premier League for the first time, we were doing predictions, myself, Connor, my brother, and our other best friend. We do yearly predictions just between the 4 of us. And my brother went in and called them Wednesday, and we won't let him live it down. It's one of our many.
No, it's just like a joke in the friend group.
It's so funny. So thanks again for coming on. Why don't you give us just a little bit of a rundown of your show, how you got into Derby and how you got into podcasting in general?
Yeah, for sure. So the podcast is called the Rams Review Podcast. And like it says, we review everything to do with Derby County, whose nickname is the Rams. We try to keep it to once a week. But as Derby County is this ever evolving circus of just whatever you want to call it, that we all know and love, it becomes a once a week show. Sometimes becomes multiple shows a week, 2, possibly even 3 or 4. We've had a few emergency podcasts when administration was called and different things like that. But, our whole goal is to, myself and my co-host, who's based in the UK, who's based in Derby, our whole goal is to just, talk about the game that we love as we would with anybody else if you were in a pub or in a restaurant with them and talking about the game. Because first and foremost, we're football fans, but we're our Derby County supporters. And then, from there, we've tried to also expand our knowledge of Derby County and their history. So we get a lot of current and former players on the podcast. We've branched out to get nutritionists and coaches, referees on the podcast, as well as some personalities in and around the game, just to talk about, what their thoughts on Derby County are, their history, kind of some of their stories, but also learning about the different facets of the game for things, for instance, the nutritionist, learning about how important that was, especially during lockdown. How to keep yourself mentally fit, physically fit, what kind of things are they going to go through in preseason. So we've had a real blast doing it. We've met so many amazing people. We do previews and reviews of games. So we've met fans from all across the country and all across the world. I sat down with a Derby fan in South Korea. It was a blast. I got up at I was 2 a.m. or something like that, and I did that. But it's incredibly fun. We have a lot of fun doing it. It keeps us mentally sane throughout the course of the season because we have this release every week that we can talk about and rant on Derby and things like that. And for the second part of your question, how did I get into podcasting? Well, I do something very similar for my professional career outside of podcasting. I'm in public relations. I've done podcasts before, and what happened was I was following a bunch of obviously on Twitter. I was following a bunch of different Derby people. And I just saw this tweet come out that says, hey, if you want to get involved, get involved. So I decided to message the lad and say, hey, I kind of do this thing. I've got a great passion for Derby. I'd love to be a part of this. We had a couple conversations. I was sending in voice clips. And I guess the one good thing that came out of this pandemic was the fact that we were able to find out this new technology called Zoom, which apparently had been around for years before, which no one knew about, which is just completely bonkers. And then this thing's been out for a while. So then we started doing live podcasts and really started to recording and that kind of stuff as you guys are now, and having these proper chats and things like that. And it's just kind of grown from there. So it's a wild ride. It's a lot of fun. We enjoy it. And I'm sure you guys know, running a podcast as well, it's equal parts fun and it's equal parts frustrating. Like sometimes you're just like, yeah, this is great. And then at the same time, you want to be pulling your hair out and you just want to break from the recording schedule and the thing, because I'm not sure many of your listeners are aware of this. They may be, they may not be, but especially for you guys, and you'll know this as podcasters, for every hour of content that you produce on a podcast, there's at least 3 or 4 hours that go in that people don't see the product or don't hear the product on the back end. It's very much the same for us in terms of researching and getting guests and sending out this different information and working on trying to get information from different sources and things like that. So there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, which obviously I hope your listeners appreciate how much work you guys put in as well to that, because it's an incredible battle rhythm. So hopefully we can get through these next 6 games, and then I can go for a well-deserved couple weeks off before we ramp back up to an early preseason because of the World Cup.
Man, do we get that? I mean, consistently, we went from 1 episode to 2 episodes a week now, and it's just been consistent. As soon as you get home from work, you're right into the editing. We do video clips, so we're right into the video clips, right into turning those video clips into TikTok clips. Everything goes in behind it, but all just to get a really good result out. So I can appreciate you on that end. Why Derby? How'd that come about?
Well, I normally tell people it's because I hate myself and I'm a glutton for punishment. But no, my dad's from the Derbyshire area. He was born and raised there. And so he grew up, he played professionally, he's coached professionally, he's scouted professionally for both teams in Europe and here in America and the MLS as well. So, football was always part of who I was, part of my identity. I grew up, in stadiums, and I grew up doing these different things. I've had a lot of experience with MLS clubs throughout the years, especially at DC United. And, the other thing though, from my dad being from the area, is he knew a lot of players from a certain era of Derby County, these legends of the clubs. And he didn't only know them, he was friends with them. And so I used to grow up with stories about how the lads used to come on their bikes and how they quit and worked at the Cadbury's factory and all this stuff. So, it was always kind of, yes, I like football. That's where my football fan mentality comes from first. But when you continue to hear these stories about these things, it kind of reinforces. I have family that live in the area. And then every time I've been to Derby, they've been so incredibly kind and courteous to me in terms of allowing me to see the ground and in the dressing rooms and meeting with the players and that kind of stuff. So it's been a phenomenal ride. Oddly enough, my dad supports Blackpool. So I don't know, makes no sense at all. But as crazy as Derby County is, as crazy and as strange as a football club that it is, because it is a very strange football club. I wouldn't have it any other way. I'll watch Forest. I'll watch any game that comes on, really. I'll talk about a lot of different types of football because I do follow it, but hand on heart, Derby County is the only team that I'm going to support until probably I'm dead. So unless they go out of business, in which case then I'll have to find another one, which is probably a real possibility. But in that case, it'll be probably Derby until I'm dead.
We love that. And that's actually a good transition into our Scarf of the Week episode part here. So I have my team is New York Red Bull. So little tension there already with the DC United area, but my other team in England is currently struggling and may or may not be
That's an understatement.
May or may not be joining the championship very soon. So we have rocked the Everton scarf for the week.
And good segue under former Derby boss Frank Lampard.
That's right. Yes, and we've got tons of things to talk about in that sense as well. But figured it was a pretty good, English team that may or may not be joining the league you guys are in now. So,
and they have a good lineage with American players as well. Obviously, Tim Howard was there for a while, but a player that I grew up watching when I was a kid was Joe Max Moore.
Yeah,
he was one of the first players to make the jump into the leagues and really be that name that you kind of knew in America as well. So yeah, great historic club, Everton. Obviously, they're struggling. I'd be struggling to see if they pick up another 4 points this season. I don't know if Frank Lampard's the right fit there. It just doesn't seem to be going a bit pear-shaped. And I do fear for them because if they do go down, you can see where the stadium will be delayed. You can see where it will be mass carnage because those players don't have relegation clauses. And you can't be playing players $50,000 a week, $60,000 a week in the championship. You just can't, even with parachute payments, it's unsustainable. So, we'll see what happens, but it makes it for a very interesting run-in for the end of the Premier League season. That's for sure.
It really does. And it's been tough, man. It's been tough watching, but you're right. Tim Howard, the first name you mentioned, is the reason I'm there. I'm a goalkeeper. I was a goalkeeper way back when I was still playing, but as a goalkeeper, Tim Howard brought me into it, kept me there. And Now I'm suffering for it, but that's okay. It's definitely made for a very interesting, at this point in the season, we're usually 11th or 12th or 9th. And it's kind of like, okay, we're surviving. We're not making Europe. Let's just see the end of the season out. But I'm glued to the TV set now every single weekend. And Wednesday is going to be massive with the Burnley showdown. So
They're trying to keep it interesting for the Everton fans this season. They're tired of the same old mid-table finish. They know they can't get to the top. So what's the best way to keep it interesting? A relegation battle. All right, well, I'll segue into mine. So I brought out the Atlanta United scarf. That's my team for MLS. And in terms of England, to hop onto the Frank Lampard train, since he has managed all three of our favorite clubs, I am a Chelsea fan. So honestly, I didn't even put that together prior to this, but yeah, I didn't. That is a weird coincidence that he's coached all three of our favorite teams. But yeah, Chelsea Derby had.
Sorry,
Yeah,
go
go
on,
ahead.
Connor.
Oh, I was just going to mention that they've had a pretty good pipeline between the two clubs the last few years. I know Fikayo Tomori, Mason Mount were there when Frank was in charge, so some good connection.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was at a Derby game and a couple seasons ago, went to a couple of them, and I saw Mason and Fick. Derby's a very special thing because you're able to meet the players and talk with them afterwards. So I spent a few minutes with Mason and Harry Wilson and Fick Tomori as well. And they had an amazing season. We almost got up that year. We also had Ashley Cole as well, which was just awesome. The fact that Ashley Cole was part of our coaching playing staff, and Jody Morris, the former Chelsea midfielder, was our assistant manager as well. And I always remember was I came out the ground and I was going around to where the players come out, and Fick had come out of the thing, and I was like chatting with him and whatever. We were talking about the game, and then all of a sudden this guy comes up and he goes, you were at fault for the first Brentford goal. And he goes, what do you mean I was at fault for the first Brentford goal? And the guy like literally is just shifting Fick Tomori's shoulders where he should stand defensively. And he's like, now if the guy's here and he's making this run, you need to step up. And he's telling this guy who would obviously be playing for England in like 12, 15 months, how to defend in the parking lot at Derby. And I was like, yeah, all right, I'm going to go, whatever. And then I went to go and I was talking with the other players and whatever. And I just turned around and the guy was still doing it like 20 minutes later. And fair play to Tomori. He just sat there and took it from this like crazed guy who was trying to teach an international quality defender how to defend. And I think, Fikayo Tomori is a fantastic player for us. One player of the season, and Mason Mount was phenomenal as well. And Harry Wilson was great. And it is a real travesty that Fikayo Tomori can't get an England team for me. I don't understand what he has to do. He's playing at AC Milan. He's doing well. I know he's come back off an injury, but how Ben White gets in and Fikayo Tomori doesn't, and Gurhey gets in and Fikayo Tomori doesn't, just completely boggles my mind. And every time, if you look on Derby County Twitter, every time like the England team's name, it's like, what does Fikayo Tomori have to do, or who did he upset in Gareth Southgate's life to not get an England call? It's just a travesty.
That's got to be pretty crazy to see that, like, to think back to when those two were on the team, and then you look at them now. Like Mason Mount's a Champions League winner, and Fikayo Tomori's playing with AC Milan and Zlatan. Like, that's just like, I can't imagine, like, just that watching that rise for the two of them has got to feel really good.
Well, I think you could tell in the games that they were steps ahead. They were complete levels above the other players. Because when you watch it, you see how players move off the ball, or you see how they're looking to try to pick a pass. And there's sometimes you'd see Mount Mason and he'd play a pass and there'd be nobody there. And you're kind of like, that's a misplaced pass. But then you're like thinking about it and you're like, no, I can see what he was trying to do there with the guy. And the guy didn't make the run because the players he was playing around with, other than Wilson and Tomori, maybe weren't as intelligent or as quick at seeing things. So he'd probably play balls 2 and 3 seconds. And then sometimes when he did, he'd give players extra 2 or 3 seconds on the ball, which is crucial in the English game, in the game in general.
All right, so why don't we move into Andrew? What do you want to start with? Do you want to start with Jozwiak, or do you want to start with here?
Let's start with Jozwiak, but I'm going to let you go and deal with it because Grace is getting upset and I don't want her to ruin the audio. That's my puppy.
Oh yeah, Grace loves to jump in and interrupt us all the time. All right, so a new designated player just signed for Charlotte, Kamil Jozwiak. Hopefully we haven't botched the name too bad. We are historically bad when it comes to that. He came over from Derby, so we wanted to get the inside scoop on him. So when he was playing for Derby, how did he fare? How was he doing?
Yeah, so Kamil Jozwiak, interesting player. He fits everything on paper, right? When we signed Kamil, it was 22-year-old Polish winger. He'd done pretty well in Lech Poznan. We knew that he was he needed a bit of polishing around the edges. He was a bit rough, a bit raw, but you see he's got a bit of skill. He's got a lot of pace. He had scored a few goals for Lech Poznan. We paid a reported fee of £4.5 million for Kamil Jozwiak. So, pretty good on paper. Polish international. You're sitting there, you're like, wow, maybe we've got this player. And a bit of the context for your listeners is Derby's scouting system traditionally does not look outside of the English home countries there. Like when we sign a foreign player, it's like, wow, they actually got passports and a plane ticket, which is shocking in today's globalized football economy. But yeah, so Kamil came. And I think I was talking about this with one of the Derby journalists the other week on our podcast, and poetically, what summed up Kamil Jozwiak's career at Derby was a disallowed goal against Nottingham Forest. In all of his appearances for Derby, he scored one goal. He was frozen out really towards the end. I know Charlotte wanted to pick him up in the January transfer window, but he picked up an ankle injury that delayed it. We know that he joined Charlotte for reported £1.5 million fee. So we're not actually going to see any of that money as Derby County because that money is owed to Lech Poznan. We still owe money on him. So you can tell how bad we are at player trading. Not great. And I think for Kamil, if he puts everything together on paper that you look at as this player and he buffs out some of these rough patches, he's going to be an incredibly great player for Charlotte. We've seen it for Poland many times. I think he scored more goals for Poland than he has for Derby in his tenure. I think the one interesting thing about Kamil Jozwiak that has to be noted is that when he came to Derby, it was during the lockdown period in England, which was very, very strict. You couldn't go outside, right? He couldn't have his family come with him. It was several months before his girlfriend could join him. He had never lived outside of Poland. So he came into a completely foreign country, into a completely foreign league. He can't get out. He can't experience the environment that he's in. He can't really get settled. His friends and family can't really help him get settled. So, that's an interesting footnote. We did also have at the time, we still do have Polish international and Christian Bielik, who's probably our best player. And he was working his way back from an ACL tear. When Bielik did come back in from that first ACL tear, that correlated with Kamil Jozwiak's best run of form in the side. He was really, really good for about 5 or 6 games, but then Christian Bielik tore his ACL again. And Kamil's form fell off the table. From everything that we heard, from everybody we spoke to, he's a nice lad. He works really hard. He wanted to be a success, and unfortunately, it just didn't work out for him at Derby. He just went missing too often, and I think the best thing that I could say would be is he was an international quality player, but he never showed it, and that was the disappointment. Was you're sitting here and you're thinking, wow, this is an international player. Like Poland, they're not going to win the World Cup, but Poland's a solid, second round quarterfinal kind of team. Fools don't play for Poland. And then you're like, okay, I don't understand how he even makes the 25 or how he'd even be in the top 35 players in Poland. And he continued to get picked for them. So, that was the unfortunate thing. And the disallowed goal against Forest was really poetic because had that gone in, his career could have gone in a completely different way. But, it was disallowed for offside or some foul or something like that. And that really just summed up. He didn't really make much of an impact, which was the sad thing. And I think it was sad for Derby to let him. I think the strange thing was that when Derby let him go, Derby only have 5 players under contract for next season because we're not able to renew contracts currently in administration. And Kamil would have been a 6th player under contract. So you're letting a contracted player go when you don't have any players for next season. And you're thinking, okay, even if we go down, if we stay up, if we go down, he's still going to be on the team. But, obviously they made the decision to get rid of him at Charlotte. And I think he leaves with everybody's best wishes at Derby and the best they can do. There's a player in there somewhere. We unfortunately didn't see it at Derby. But hopefully we go through and we see it at Charlotte.
That's real interesting that you mentioned that he's this international quality player, but he hasn't shown it. And you talk about some of the things he needs to bring, polish around the edges, basically. For a player, and I told Connor this when he signed, for me, the only thing I knew about him was I packed his team of the season card in FIFA 20 when he was at Lech Poznan. Didn't know anything about him. Didn't know he made that move to Derby, excuse me. And I'm assuming that fans of Charlotte FC, who a lot of them probably just recently started following football or MLS or Charlotte in general, don't know much about him either. So from your guess, do you think that he will bring success to the Charlotte side? If you know much about the Charlotte side at all, I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. I think they needed pace out wide. They needed an attacking force out wide. And I think Kamil Jozwiak fits that bill. He's also a bit flexible as he can play wing back, which we see him play for Poland with great aplomb. I think in the Charlotte dressing room will help him because I know that they have 3 or 4 Poles in the squad already. So he should be able to go down there to Charlotte and fit into that dressing room. It's not like, it's a different country. Yeah, he's going to have to deal with a grueling travel schedule. He's going to have to deal with terrible, terrible amounts of oppressive heat and humidity. But I think in terms of fitting in with a group, I think he could fit in very quickly because he's got a lot of Polish players down there. Some of whom I think 3 or 4 are probably on the Polish team. I know one essentially is, and they refused him, and then he played because they said he was injured, but he wasn't. And that was a weird thing. But he will know a few of those Polish players. He will have played with them, so I think that'll help his transition. And I think, obviously the COVID pandemic is starting to it's not over, but it's starting to wind down, and things are starting to open back up. So I think he'll be able to experience the city. He'll be able to experience life outside of kind of football. He'll have his family and his girlfriend there, and I would think also, the pace of the MLS might suit him because it's not, it's not 2 or 3 games a week. It's not relentless schedules. It's not torrential rain. It's not freezing cold all the time when you're playing. And I think also the pace of the MLS it's a different league. It's a different style of play. And I think the style of play might suit him better. We might get a little bit more time on the ball. He might be able to do 1 or 2 different things that he wasn't able to show at Derby due to the quick pace of the championship, the cut and thrust of the championship. So I think there's a player in there, like I said, and I think that he'll be in the right situation where he can shine. And I think the thing for Kamil Jozwiak is, like you said, he's obviously not a known quantity, right? He's going to want to play well. He's going to want to go to the World Cup with Poland. So it'll be interesting to see if Charlotte are out of the MLS playoffs very soon, very quickly. Does he get a loan move to try to stay sharp for the World Cup? That'll be interesting. But the thing is, for Kamil Jozwiak, longer term for his career, nobody knows him. He's not really a known quantity. Like you said, he played for Lech Poznan and had an indifferent spell at Derby, let's say. He's gone to Charlotte. If he fails at Charlotte or doesn't pull up any trees, is there a route back to him in Europe other than Polish football? I mean, there'll always be the Polish thing there because he's an international, but I'm not saying it's a last chance saloon for Kamil Jozwiak, but Charlotte provides him a great opportunity to relaunch his career, to try to kick back on, to get back into one of Europe's top leagues and show what he can do.
I think that's a really, really great transition point for what we want to talk about next. So we talk about how he's going to be linking up with other Poles, right? So you got Karol Swiderski in that team, who is currently lighting up Charlotte FC. He's their main point of attack, doing super, super well. But you have other Polish players in the league itself who are doing kind of the same thing, trying to make that next step up. You've got Patrick Klimala playing at New York Red Bull, my club. He's my starting striker. Kasper Szybilko, same deal. He starts next to Swiderski, I believe, when Lewandowski is not in that side. A lot of them have that same build of wanting to try and take that next step. And this is something that we've been trying to talk about with somebody who kind of oversees or has a team overseas or is from overseas. And that is, what type of image does MLS have to the overseas football community? I know you say you're based kind of out of the US, but you have a lot of ties back there. If you could share kind of just something along those lines of how they see it, because we've been trying to do this thing where we advocate the fact that it has been a league of great change over the past 5 years or so, where it's so much less about people coming to retire and more about, kind of like what you said, young players coming in to make a name for themselves, to make that move over. Is that narrative being displayed overseas at all?
Yeah, I think it is. I think the narrative is changing slowly and surely. I think you're always going to have your band of people that believe it's a retirement league, just because of the sole fact that it's a newer league and they probably don't study the MLS so closely. So they only see really when the big names, Pirlo, Lampard, Ibrahimovic, Gerrard, Ashley Cole, they kind of churn on over and you're like, yeah, all those guys are old. It's a retirement league. Kaká was one of them. Nani's also there as well. But I do think that, when you look at MLS, like you said, the league's changed tremendously over the past 10 or 15 years. When you look back at the watershed moment of the David Beckham signing and the designated player rule and how financially close MLS came to folding before David Beckham, I think it's made tremendous leaps and bounds. When you look at some of the past expansions like Chivas USA, which was just a half-cocked, half-brained idea that failed. You had two teams that folded in Miami Fusion and Tampa Bay Mutiny. It had kind of silly nicknames. You had, obviously the New York, New Jersey Metro Stars. That's just a mouthful. Obviously they're now, Red Bull New York and whatever. So, it is a league of change. I think the way that they're going into markets is really smart now. When you look at Austin, when you look at Atlanta as a marquee one, Minnesota is a good place to play. Portland and Seattle have amazing fan bases. Charlotte, second highest grossing turnout for their attendance for their first ever game next to the FA Cup, the League Cup final at Wembley. It's an incredible thing. And I think there's so much talent on show. And I think what you're starting to see now is you're starting to see a flux of players leave MLS to Europe. In some respects, that's really, really good because it's growing not only the men's team and the game, they're going out to Europe to be ambassadors for the league, to show that they can play, but you're also, losing that talent that you want to keep in MLS. So I think in some respects, MLS is maybe losing its moniker as a retirement league and more as like a selling league, because at the end of the day, the salary caps are going to limit what a player can earn in their growing potential. And if I'm a potential player and I'm doing okay for DC United, or I'm doing well for whatever. I mean, you look at Paredes at DC United, he went to Wolfsburg. Why? Because Wolfsburg gets the Bundesliga. They're paying more money. And what do you want to do? Be stuck on a regular salary at DC United, maybe making $65,000 a year? Or do you want to go and get paid the life-changing money to go out there and do that? So I think, that's something the MLS probably needs to address. They've tried to address it with the designated player rule. There's a lot of rehash with that with the NSAL. And I could talk to you about the NSAL nauseum because I studied it extensively for both my undergrad and my master's. But I think it's got a phenomenal I think it's growing in reputation, and I think uniquely Derby has a very unique and very exciting tie to the MLS because several players have come from the MLS, either from Derby to the MLS or from the MLS to Derby. So we're one of the few clubs in England that has a great amount of players that have transferred between the leagues. So I think it's growing in reputation. I think there's still a lot to be done, but at the end of the day, it's losing its moniker, I think, in some aspects, but then there's sometimes that they just don't, because there's some people that are just not as educated about it, right? You guys follow MLS week in and week out. You can see what's coming through. You can see the player transactions that are happening between these leagues. But then I think for people in England that get maybe the one occasional game, and then they sit there and they go, oh, this league's crap. But to be fair, I could watch a lot of championship games, and a lot of those games are crap as well. Like Huddersfield versus Luton, you're watching it and you're like, I watched a game. It was Luton Town versus Peterborough. And I'm like, if this was Austin versus Nashville, I would turn this off. But I'm not to be disrespectful to those teams, but you see, because you look at the teams that are playing, you don't look at the standard of the play that's going on. You look at a Bundesliga game and it's Freiburg versus Augsburg. You'd be like, oh, watch that. That's Bundesliga. That's all right. But if the players were putting on MLS kits and it was Inter Miami versus Kansas City Wizards, you'd be like, sorry, Sporting Kansas City, would be like, oh, I'm turning this off. This is just an MLS game. This is just poor. But it's those team names. So I think MLS is doing a good job and it's growing. And I think, they're starting to get a following in the UK. There's a couple podcasts that do them from the UK and things like that. But you're always going to get those people that think it's the retirement league. And with good reason, though, because the financial barriers are in there for a reason, because you don't want it to fail like NSAL did. But I think it's growing. I think there's a lot of talent there, and I think it's an untapped market for a lot of these teams. And I wish Derby, in a way, would look at some of these players, because you could get them for virtually no money in terms of wages and a transfer fee. Hypothetically, in the football economy speaking, not
Sure.
for you and Connor, that would be a lot of money. But
Right.
you go out there, and I think there's an opportunity to sign players that could do well and then have sell-on value as well.
I think that's, first off, Kansas City Wizards is a name I wish we brought back, because I haven't heard that in years, and that was phenomenal. But I really like how you mentioned that, where we are losing that moniker, but I still think personally, and we've talked about this a lot on some of our other episodes, that there's a little bit more time before we can make that jump into what the world market is, like you mentioned, because you don't want to fail like the NASL. And we talk about how if we were to do, Pro-Rel is something we can dive into forever. But if we were to jump into Pro-Rel right now, you've got teams like Chicago Fire who are bringing in 7,000 fans a game. You take away their professional status and they fold, right?
Well, there'd be teams that would go down and they never come back up. And then you're expecting someone like Richmond Kickers, let's say, or Charleston Battery to come up and play in the MLS. And they're sitting in like college stadiums, or they're sitting in, like minor league baseball stadiums. I mean, there's a former Derby County player who played for DC United, John Harkes. He's the sporting director and coach at Greenville Triumph. We talked to John Harkes, Greenville Triumph are doing amazingly well, right? If they were to get promoted even to USL League One, the infrastructure is not there. So, I mean, pro relegation, I think eventually has to happen, because that's the different draw for American fans into that, right? It's something different. When you first started learning about the game, you're like, what do you mean if you're crap, you can go down? Like, they could do it in baseball, right? Because some of the AAA stadiums and the Major League stadiums, the teams would be level possibly, but the stadiums and the infrastructure, like no one wants to go to Charleston Battery for an MLS game. It's just not going to happen. So you have to bridge that gap. You have to raise that infrastructure. And so, yeah, I mean, it's something that needs to happen, but I think you're right. It's a few years off right now. And I know MLS has done like this next gen kind of developmental league, which is kind of like a second tier. That was a little disappointing, because you'd think maybe we could work with the USL to develop. I mean, Richmond Kickers and Charleston Battery have been around for 20 odd years. They've been around as long as MLS. And those are just two of the, the River Dogs and all that stuff. They're just a couple of the teams that I know. So you just feel like they could work better with USL and bring them into that conversation and maybe make that like an MLS and slowly start to build that up. But some of these MLS teams would go down and never come back up, like the Chicago Fire. And I think the thing is like, you got to get out of the mindset of having these clubs as franchises. The Derby County is a football club. It was 1884, founder member of the Football League, used to be a baseball team and a cricket team, but it kind of feels like sometimes they're franchises. And when they're franchises, has a different kind of feel. So I think they're doing really well. When you look at the community building that LAFC did when they started out, you look at the Pacific Northwest there with Vancouver and Portland and Seattle. There's a lot of great history there that they can capitalize on in terms of things like that. So yeah, I think pro relegation definitely for that, definitely needs to happen, but they have to make sure that they get the infrastructure and do it right. Because if you screw it up, you'll lose everything that you built over 25 odd years in the MLS if you get it wrong. So it needs to be done right, and you need to make sure that the infrastructure is there. But MLS can only do that if they help themselves and invest in the game at lower levels.
Speaking of
trying
pro,
to invest in the actual league itself. Sorry, Connor.
No worries. I was just going to say, speaking of Pro-Rel, do you think that's something that would garner more respect for MLS overseas?
I don't know. I think no. I'm going to say no, and I'm going to stick by this answer because I could go either way, but I'm going to stick with no, because then you'd be dealing with teams that like Union Omaha or Greenville Triumph, and people don't know where they are on a map. And I think a lot of people probably don't even understand where, Austin is on a map, or, Minnesota or Kansas City, or some of these some of the teams where the MLS teams are, right? It would be difficult to find them on the map, because when you're looking at a country, and that's not the fault of anybody, but when you're looking at it, if I showed you a map of England, you could probably tell me where London is. But if I asked where the city of Derby is, or the city of Leicester, or I asked you where Carlisle was, or Newport in Wales, not saying, I'm sure you guys would know where it is, but my point is, if I showed the average American that, would they really know where that is on a map? So then you're dealing with teams that are kind of like strange, like locations and things like that. And I think people's knowledge of America, especially in the UK, kind of goes around the big hubs of New York, Los Angeles, Miami, because you have the movies in New York, you have Hollywood and Los Angeles, and you have nice weather in Disney World and or not in Miami, in Orlando, and Miami, the Florida Peninsula there. So I think in some respects, yes, it would, but I would sit there and say, no, I think the MLS, in order to get more respect worldwide, there are other things they could do ahead before they get to promotion and relegation to garner that respect, to grow that game even further, and then start to add that on. But I don't think that's one thing. I think that's one thing of many that's holding it back, but I don't think it's the main thing.
Yeah, I would say I would agree with you as well. I kind of feel like, for my personal opinion, I think it would help the league a lot if they got some more, like, if they produced more players along the lines of Alphonso Davies. Because, teams go look at him playing at Bayern and making a huge name for himself, and then they go look, where did he come from? Oh, he's Canadian? Oh, he came from Vancouver. That's MLS. Wow, MLS was able to produce a product of this quality. Maybe I should, keep a better eye on them. So, and
Well,
I think
when you look at it, Richie Larea, he signed for Nottingham Forest from Toronto. They were looking in that market. Obviously, Derby got Wayne Rooney, but he was a name at the time. So, yeah, I think people are surprised when they see the quality of these American players coming through, or the not necessarily American, but the Canadian, the North American players that are coming through in the youth systems. You look at Ricardo Pepi, and he went straight to Augsburg. He got for big money. Paredes, he went for $7 million to Wolfsburg. So, it's transactions like that are going to garner you not only those transactions, but also when those players start performing. Look at Brendan Aronson at Leipzig, right? Came from Red Bull, did well, moved on. You look at a player like Jack Harrison. He left England, went to Wake Forest, drafted #1, went to New York City FC, toured up for a couple of years, went back to City on loan at Leeds. Now he's a Leeds player. So I think it's a lot of players. It's unfortunate to burden the players with this, but the players have not a responsibility, but naturally when a player goes overseas, you're going to look at them and go, yeah, they're an MLS player. Can they really hack it? There's always going to be that question mark over them. And I think it's going to take a couple of years for, those players to perform at the higher level. Something like Aronson, right? Leeds wanted him because Jesse March is there. When you look at American managers, Jesse March, Bob Bradley, they think they're jokes because Bob Bradley has failed. He failed horribly at Swansea. He was a disaster, right? So every time they've had anything, so it's unfair for Jesse March in a way to come in and be tarred with that same brush. But also, that's something that he has to now work on to try to get over, in addition to try to do Leeds. If Aronson goes to Leeds, which they were reportedly interested in, he has to now perform, because if he doesn't, that's going to set back American players a while. Derby had an American player, Dwayne Holmes. Dwayne Holmes never played in MLS. He came through Huddersfield, but there was always, Dwayne Holmes is American. Dwayne Holmes is American. But then when he started playing well and he played the 2 times for America, he was in really good form. And they're like, wow, we've got a real player. He's since fallen off the map. But, we've had American players that have done well. We've had American players that have done poorly. And I think it's also just a bit of the unknown. And I think it's a bit of the, I wouldn't say xenophobia. I think it would just be a bit of the backward thought. Okay, like Connor and Andrew, right? You guys are MLS guys. But let's say you heard an English guy talking about the NFL. You're going to kind of be like, why is this English guy talking about it? It just because of the accent and diction and the way they look at the game. It doesn't mean they don't understand the NFL as good as any of the three of us do. But it just sounds weird, right? It just sounds weird. Like for me, I have to deal with it. I'm on the Derby County podcast. When I go on radio and stuff like that, people comment and go, who the hell's this American guy? They don't know what he's talking about. So I have to work harder to be able to not only not to find my voice, but I have to work hard. It's like a woman, right? If a woman wanted to go be a manager, or a referee, she's going to have to work twice as hard to be able to be respected in that profession. It's just the way unfortunately, that's just the way the world is, right? In the game today. And she's going to have to work double or triple as hard to do a Champions League final as what another male ref, who also has to work hard, but she's going to have to work 3 times as hard to be able to do that. So I think there's a little bit of that too. I think it's a little bit of, this is it's America. They're new at soccer. They don't really know what they're doing. They can't even call it football. They're an NFL team. There's all these kind of things. So I think, it's a responsibility on the players and the managers that go over to do well. I mean, they know what they want to do well anyway, but I guess you hope you understand what I'm trying to say is just the better that they do, the more respected the MLS is going to be, because if they buy these players and they fail, it's going to set MLS back, because they're going to go, oh, that talent's not up to the par of this. that talent's not up to par. I mean, you can sit there and have 76,000 people at Mercedes-Benz Arena in Atlanta. But then if the players can't do it in Stoke, it's kind of like, well, okay, they're just doing their own thing. It's fine. Just keep them over there. And it'll set the game back. So I think one of the big things is the players that get sold go overseas and produce and perform at a decent clip and a decent level. That's going to get a lot of respect for the league, probably more than anything, even in terms of wages growth and everything like that.
Yeah,
sorry, that was a really long, convoluted way to my point, and I apologize for that.
No worries. I absolutely understand where you're coming from because I see it at Chelsea, honestly, with Christian. He has like one bad game and, the comments are blowing him up on Twitter and, he's finished, he's washed, he's just brought in for marketing. And then I watched the same thing happen with someone like Callum Hudson-Odoi, who has like one bad game.
Callum Hudson-Odoi shouldn't be playing for Chelsea. He's a waste of time. They could release him. They wouldn't lose him.
They love
but it's
him.
the same, but you're dead on. And that's the exact point. You just hit my nail on the head. I forgot about Christian Pulisic. I forgot about him. But you're dead on. If he has a poor game, they go, oh, look at this American guy. Americans can't play the game. He's a waste of time because he has one poor game. And Hudson-Odoi can have 15 poor games, basically one time for England, and Bayern Munich wanted him for 30 million. They're like, oh, look at the great savior, Callum Hudson-Odoi. He put a cross in. It's like, yeah, Pulisic did that 3 times, but let's not worry about that. Hudson-Odoi is not a very good footballer. He shouldn't be playing for Chelsea. He's not at their level. They should release him. It's the same thing with Werner, right? They paid all this money for Werner, German international, whatever. Werner's a waste of time. But if Pulisic had the same goal record as Werner, or even the same goal record as Lukaku since that Inter interview came out, they'd be running Pulisic out of Dodge. So he has to work harder now to be able to get legitimacy for American players overseas because they've done it with Tim Howard and Brian McBride and whatever. And Clint Dempsey did it to a degree as well. Landon Donovan did it. But it's like you have to work twice as hard now just because of the fact that you're this nationality in this league for people to respect the fact that you can play. We know Pulisic can play. Can he play at a top 16? I don't know. I think the jury's still out a little bit on that. But he's there. He's performing well. I'm saying longer term for over the course of his career. He's a Premier League player, but he has to work twice as hard to get the same amount of respect that a fraction of the respect would, a fraction of the work is needed for an English player to get the same kind of respect in the league, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I don't want to go too far on a tangent on it, but it was very frustrating to watch because Christian like single-handedly after they came back after the lockdown period, he was single-handedly carrying Chelsea to points at that point when they were, I think, still under Frank. I mean, he was playing out of his mind. I remember him like almost single-handedly beating Man City when they played against them after the lockdown. He was phenomenal with them. And then it's just like all of a sudden he gets hurt, he comes back, his form isn't, on top of the world. And it's like everybody forgot all these amazing things that he did for them. So I totally get what you're saying. I'm sure it's happening in other countries as well. I don't follow those leagues as much, but I imagine like Weston's probably going through it in Italy and like Tyler Adams in Germany. It's probably everywhere.
Yeah, but when you think about it, it's kind of like a bit of not discrimination because that's a loaded word, right? I'm not going to say discrimination in terms of this because they're talking about different things here. But if I say, Connor, we've just signed a Dutch midfielder for 14 million, you're going to be like, he must be quality. Or I've signed a Brazilian, or I've signed a Portuguese winger. You're like, oh, that's just so good. I've signed an American. You're like, it doesn't have, what I mean? It's not sexy. It doesn't have the same sexy ring to it. I've signed a Canadian. You're like, they play? Like, okay, whatever. But then, all these players from these sexy countries. Yeah, I've signed a French defender, and you're like, woo, he must be good. I mean, we signed a Dutch guy named Mike Taverick, and they all like, Virgil van Mike, he's the greatest thing. And the guy was garbage. He played like 3 games, and he's just like, we're just going to give you for free back to the team we signed you from to get you out of here. Like, nice enough guy, just didn't work out. But because he was Dutch, you see, it was like, Dutch, this is what we've been waiting for. But if we'd signed an American, it'd have been like, nah, that's not as cool. He's already on the back foot because it's not a sexy country to be from. In terms of in the football, we know that it's the sexiest country in the world. We know that. We're not stupid people. But I'm just saying, like, in terms of the football mantra of it, it's not sexy to sign an American. So then automatically on the back foot as a player there, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, totally understand that. Andrew, where do you want to transition to next? Did you want to go to?
I was going to say that I was going to build off of that. I love this tangent because there's so much we can talk about. I think that changes with a very good World Cup year this year, by the way, the whole American negativity outlook. But that's a whole nother episode. But I guess my last question on this topic before we transition to MLS and American players, and like specifically over there, what can MLS as a league do to improve this view overseas? So we talked about a little bit of not needing you. I think you had made the comment of they don't necessarily need to go to straight to Pro-Rel. There are a few other things. Connor mentioned developing more players, but is there anything else that you would think maybe would grow this league outside of just really good players and maybe some Pro-Rel?
Yeah, I think that what the MLS's next step needs to be, and I've thought this for years, is they have the designated players, right? The designated players come in. They have 3 slots now, I think, for designated players. They normally go out and get people who are going to sell the shirts. I think about Thierry Henry at Red Bull, right? Thierry Henry came in. I mean, he did well. He was obviously levels above when I've seen him play. But it's Thierry Henry. He was like 34. Pirlo, Lampard, Gerrard, Ashley Cole, Zlatan, right? You get these players. I think what you need more players coming to MLS. Like Johnny Russell is a perfect example. He was at Derby County. He lost his way, lost his love for football. We sold him to Kansas. He's amazing, right? Johnny Russell I love Johnny Russell. I love Johnny Russell. Johnny Russell's
I do too.
he's like a godlike figure. He's captain. He's scoring goals. He's doing well. He's really rebuilt his career. I think what it takes for MLS to take the next stop is they get players like Jordan Shaqiri, right? Jordan Shaqiri's come to Chicago Fire, big player. Schweinsteiger was another one that was at the Fire as well. I think what MLS has to do to improve is they have to look at getting players who are in their prime years in Europe, who are not necessarily like world-class superstars. We're not talking like Neymar and Mbappe level, right? But we're talking solid players, like Connor said, Callum Hudson-Odoi. Players like that, players who are in their prime, who are, who have ambitions of playing at higher levels, bringing them into the league and filtering them that way. The only problem is that if you're Callum Hudson-Odoi and you're on 150,000 a week at Chelsea or whatever it is, I think the going wage at Chelsea is 150. Why would you go and play for Inter Miami? You're only going to do it if you're a designated player. So I think what MLS needs to do is MLS needs to either expand the designated player slots, but that reduces the parity of the league, or they need to create a new mid-level exemption kind of thing to allow players between this salary and this salary. Like you can't pay designated player. I can pay players whatever I want. I can pay them $50 million a year if I wanted to get Lionel Messi. It doesn't matter. I can do whatever I want. But I think you could have one in between where you say, you can earn up to $500,000 a year. You can earn up to $2 million a year. Right. And you have a mid-level exemption for 3 or 4 players. I think once players start, because I think the thing that's attractive to MLS, you saw this with Ryan Shawcross when he went to Inter Miami. He was at Stoke for 15 years. Right. It sucks in Stoke. It's cold. It's wet. It's windy. And he goes to Miami. It's lifestyle. Right. Who wouldn't want to play football in Southern California in the summer? Beautiful. Who wouldn't want to play in the nation's capital in spring and summer? I mean, it's hot. Yes. But you see what I mean? Like, this country's beautiful. Seattle, Vancouver, Portland, the beautiful places to play. Lifestyle wise, a lot of these players would be better, instead of playing for Luton Town, would be better to go and play in the MLS because they're going to earn the exact same money. Right. And then they're going to have a better lifestyle of that. But I think the thing is, you have to get players like a Callum Hudson-Odoi level. And we just mentioning him because we were just talking about him, who are names, but are kind of on the fringes of the Premier League team. And so they can come to MLS so that they're a known quantity. They're not a superstar, and they can build their reputations. And I think once you start seeing players go in their prime to this league, then you shift the narrative from being a retirement league to a place where people want to come because it's attractive to play, right? I'm going to get paid to do it. And it's a beautiful country to play in. It's a beautiful lifestyle to have. In terms of being in England, I mean, look at England. It's seasons in winter. It's dark most of the time. It's cold. It's rainy. It's snowy. It's not great. That's why they all escape to Spain and Portugal for the sun and Dubai and stuff. But if you come to America, a lot different. I think MLS have to change that. I think they just need to expand the salary caps more, start making the league a little bit more attractive to those mid-level kind of players. Because, I mean, think about it, Connor. We were just talking about Christian Pulisic. Would Christian Pulisic sign for Philadelphia Union because it's in his hometown? No, would he sign for him right now?
No.
Probably not.
he's gonna make more money, even though it's in his hometown, it's in his home state, right? He's gonna make more money at Chelsea. And unfortunately, players' careers are short. He's gonna retire very young then. But you have to be able to get that quality of player who wants to come to MLS in their prime years because they see that as an opportunity to continue to grow. When you look at the national team, there's basically two versions of the men's national. There's the version that all play in Europe, and then there's the version they play when all the European players don't get released. And there's like two different ones. But when the World Cup comes around, out of the 23-man roster, I can pretty much assure you 20 are going to be from Europe. They won't be from the MLS. So you have to make sure the MLS is attractive for those mid-level men's national team kind of level players to come in and make sure that that league can continue to grow, because then it's seen as you're changing there from retirement league to somewhere where people can go and have a good lifestyle. They can earn their money. They can earn the wages that they would in England or comparable to it, or Europe or whatever. And that's going to raise the standard of play, because then the young players coming through, they have to get to a different level to get in the first team. And then once they do there, they're going to grow on and then say, hey, once you go on, the opportunities in Europe are abound because we've got this player trading market going on. So I think that's a crucial key, is just opening up the markets and allowing prime age players see it as more valuable opportunity to go in there to the league.
I think you severely underestimate Greg Berhalter's ability to call in Jordan Lewis and Jonathan Lewis. You don't know that inside joke. That's another inside joke with our friend group. Jonathan Lewis, Sebastian Lletget, and basically half a roster full of MLS players. So maybe 20 is a stretch, but I would agree with you, right? So we have our GAM and our TAM, and that's kind of like a mid-level exception where you use that to take the salary of somebody who's almost a designated player or just above that designated player and turn him into a mid-level exception type of player. But there's just not enough of it, because that sort of money is used for so many other different things, whether it be, like I mentioned, buying down players, straight purchasing of other players. The other side of that is that when you sell a player on for, we talk about Paredes, right? And his move to Wolfsburg, because MLS is a single entity and all these teams are drawn into it, right? DC United doesn't see all of that 7 million that they get. So that is another massive thing for me personally, where that needs to massively flip.
And you're right, because at the point I develop a player, I sell him on, and you're Don Garber, right? And you're rubbing your hands because you're getting 5 million, I'm getting 2, and I spent 10 years training the guy, and I'm now out a player.
Right.
Now I spend to replace the player, and you're doing it, and the collective do it. So I think you're right in some respects. That has to change. If DC United develop a player and they sell him for 50 million, they should get the 50 million. It's their player. Right. Because at the end of the day, if I don't pay your wages and I'm the owner of DC United, I own you. I'm the owner, right? You're my player. I'm paying your wages. I own you essentially. Right. Then I tell you, and Connor takes part of the money, but Connor's not paying your wages. He got nothing to do with it. He's just sitting here making sure I got a schedule and the right sleeve patches and the numbers on. So why am I giving a cut to him? He's got nothing to do with this. And so that, you're right, that has to change as well. The MLS players and teams have to see more of the transfer money that goes through and keep it out of the commissioner's office.
100%. I think that the massive difference too, and it didn't really hurt us, and I say us as a league, right? It didn't really hurt us early on, early 2010s into the 2015 type of years, because we weren't selling so many people for this much money before. I believe the turnover rate for this amount of money was at max $750,000. I don't know if that's changed, but if we're selling people, like, again, we'll go to the Paredes for $7 million and we're getting $750,000 in return, the league doesn't grow that way. Well, the teams can't grow that way. The league itself can become more sustainable, but the teams will never be able to compete for Champions League. And we were talking about this in one of our other episodes, where if you want to compete for Champions League, you need to have more money, because every other Mexican team that you play against is deep, because they have the money to fill out the bottom half of their roster, where we are, instead of pumping that into our teams, we're pumping it into our league, so that if we have a bad year, like a COVID year, we don't fold, which I get to a degree. But if we want to grow ourselves, our teams individually in the game, it will help grow our league just as much if they're being successful in the Champions League. We win the Champions League, go to the World Cup, win a game in the Club World Cup. that's massive. That's never been done before. So things like that definitely need to change as well. And we can sit here and talk forever, but I did also want to ask a little bit about kind of these you talked about the exchange between Derby and MLS, but the championship in general. You got Daryl Dike, who is at Barnsley, now is at West Brom. Ethan Horvath, who is going to be most likely on the World Cup roster with Richie Laryea at Nottingham Forest. Anthony Robinson and Tim Ream over at Fulham. Tim Ream, a guy close to my heart. We drafted him in our MLS draft. He was one of the first players I really remember making a big move. Love Tim Ream. Matthew Olasunde at Preston. And as you mentioned, Dwayne Holmes, Huddersfield, previously at Derby. They've all made appearances in the championship. So how are these players received? And I know you talked a little bit about it, but is it is it really performance based, where they have to earn it, or are we getting to a point where it's like, okay, Americans are making their way through international competition, people are going all over the world, these guys, do they still need to earn as much respect, I guess is the way I'm trying to phrase this, as they did when they first went over there?
I think it depends on the player, and it depends on the team that they're in. I know when we signed Dwayne, nobody really had heard about him or whatever. We got bombarded with messages, obviously, because I was American, and they were like, who's this Dwayne Holmes? And to be honest, I'd never heard of him. But he obviously he was born in America, lived in England most of his life, but he feels American, so he's played for the national team. And I think it's with any player. I think when you play well and you do well, people are going to respond to that. And I think when you don't play well, people aren't going to respond to that. I mean, Nottingham Forest have a very good goalkeeper in Brice Samba. Brice Samba had done a couple rash things. He got himself sent off, straight red, coming out the box, took the guy out. Horvath came in. Horvath did really, really well. He was replaced at the weekend for some reason in their game against Blackpool. I don't know why, but I felt like from talking to some of my Forest, friends or whatever, they were talking to me and they were like, yeah, who's this American and whatever. And anytime you hear who's this American, you're kind of like, would you say that? Like, who's this Senegalese player that you have? Like, no one would say that. Like, who's this Canadian? Like, whatever. But I think MLS I think the players, I think it's an untapped market. I think these players have potential. I think these teams in England, they take risks on a lot of players from the continent that probably aren't up to snuff. I mean, Derby signed a guy from Spain and he forgot his insoles and he couldn't walk and he couldn't play. And they sent him back after like 5 games, literally forgot his orthotics. It was insane. And we paid like $3 million for the privilege of doing that. But I think it just takes these teams to take risks, to look at the players and not look at the nationality and look what they're producing on the field. I think the game's changing. I think American players have proven they can play in England. You look at Joe Max Moore, Tim Howard, Brian McBride, Landon Donovan, Clint Dempsey, Christian Pulisic, these players have had, Tim Reams played in the Premier League, Jedi, Anthony Robinson has played, in the Premier League. So these players can perform, these players can thrive. And I think it's just the right environments at the right times. And I do think they are, I think people are starting to wean away off of that and starting to see, I think America being at the World Cup will help. I think a good World Cup run from America will help internationally, because people don't generally watch national team games when you're not part of that country, right? No one's just going to tune in and be like, hey guys, Algeria is playing South Sudan tonight on TV. Let's just crack open a beer and watch it. Like that's just not going to happen. We're just not going to do that. So you wouldn't see them. But if they're in the World Cup and they're playing Ecuador, you're like, oh, the South Sudanese team, these guys know what they're doing. And how often do we see, these teams like Ghana had a good run back in 2006, and that got a lot of players moves, that got Ghanaian football. Oh, hey, these Ghanaian players can play. We signed a couple from the World Cup team. They did well. Now we're going to go on, So I think that'll help a lot. But I think it's just about performing week in and week out. And I think when you do that, you're going to get the respect of the fan base, and then people are going to then look less at your nationality and look how you're producing on the field. It's different for Chelsea. It's different for Christian Pulisic because they're under such a microscope all the time, and you can analyze every facet of their games. But I think at the lower levels, I think it's just another area where teams can look to improve in an undervalued market.
So one man we wanted to talk about in particular, I'm sure you were probably expecting us to ask at some point about this, but what were your thoughts when Derby brought in Wayne Rooney originally, like prior to him doing anything at Derby?
Yeah, it was a marketing ploy. He was brought in by the sponsor 32 Red, given the 32 red shirt, given the 32 shirt. Yeah, really, I just thought it was a marketing ploy. From what I understand, the manager didn't want him. It was strictly because we had a star player clause and we basically could get Wayne Rooney for free, sell a bunch of kit. We ran out of R's and 32s for a large swath of time and selling kit. It helped raise Derby's profile because all of a sudden we were on TV more and things like that. And we didn't, and again, we felt like Wayne Rooney was a little washed up, not because he was at DC United, but because we'd seen him at Everton and he was poor at Everton. That's why he went to DC United. But to be fair to Wayne, he came in early. He didn't have to report till like January, reported in mid-November. So he was fit, started playing. He scored some goals up till lockdown. He was phenomenal. Like Rooney was great. Like just rolling back the years running the show. Came out of lockdown, clearly wasn't interested, put on a lot of weight, had a back injury, fit enough to play in Soccer Aid, not fit enough to play for Derby, mind you. And then when things started to go pear-shaped under Philip Kaku, it kind of felt like he was kind of the cuckoo in the nest, forcing the other eggs out. And I think that left a really bad taste in my mouth. And then last season in the relegation fight, he had no real pattern of play. He was just kind of getting win. They didn't stay up because they won a game. They stayed up because Rotherham couldn't win 3 games or 4 games or 5 games in hand. That's why Derby stayed up. But this season, to be fair to Rooney, he's really changed my opinion. I've always liked him as a player. And to be honest, as a manager, he's destined for a top job. He's completely changed my opinion of him in this season. The things that he's had to deal with, he's dealt with a 21-point deduction. He's dealt with coming back to preseason with 8 players. He's had to sign players on $4,500 a week. He's had no transfer budget. He's had transfer embargo. He's not been allowed to play certain youth players because he can't register new players. He couldn't offer players new contracts, Phil Jangielko being one of them, Sam Baldock being another. They left, couldn't replace him. There were reports that he was paying for the away travel and bus fare for the team. He was also bought like a drone for the training ground and things like that. So Rooney's had to deal with so much in his small time at management. He's done everything with dignity and respect. We've had a protracted takeover now going on for nearly 2 years. We're in administration. There's fears that the club could be liquidated, and Wayne has been able to deal with everything, showing his frustration, but dealing with class and dignity. And to be honest with you, it'll be a sad day when Wayne Rooney leaves Derby County. I hope he can stay after the season. I hope we can get this off the field mess done and taken care of, because we need to keep him, because if he's been able to mold a team that's in a chance for survival with a 21-point deduction, which is incredible, absolutely incredible, dealing with cast off players and just players that just obviously weren't number 1 on the target list, right? We'll just put it that way. And without the 21-point deduction, we'd be safe with all that. And we're still in with a shout of saving it. And it's going to be down to Wayne Rooney's management, his leadership, and how he's been able to deal with it. And I can't say enough good things about him. I wasn't necessarily a fan for him in the middle part there between lockdown and this season, but yeah, if you ask me at the front, Connor, what did I think about Wayne Rooney? I didn't like him when he came in, but now I'm absolutely on board with Rooney and everything that he's doing. Derby need to keep him for the next 2 to 3 years, because he could really rebuild this club in a very good image if he's given the time and resources to do it.
Yeah, man, that seems pretty.
You want to go?
Oh, go ahead.
I think all of that kind of ties in really well about where we were going to go for our final topic here was, this 21-point deduction that you kept hitting on that everybody knows about. I mean, if you talk about Derby at all, everybody knows about the administration, the deduction, and the phenomenal run that they've put him on. But going into this year, what were your thoughts? Like, where was your mind?
I think we knew we were going to get a deduction. I think we knew we were going to get a 12-point deduction because we'd skirted the financial fair play or FFP rules for a couple of years. And, a lot of fans were funny about it, but I thought eventually at one point the sheriff's going to come knocking on the door and you're going to have to pay the piper. That happened this year. We were put under a transfer embargo because of these irregularities while the investigation was ongoing. So I think we always knew it was going to be a struggle. I mean, Sheffield Wednesday went down with a minus 12-point deduction that was then reduced to -6, and they couldn't survive with a -6 deduction. So you're thinking, okay, this is kind of curtains, but obviously we didn't start out with a points deduction. We started off pretty well with the season. got a win, tied against Peterborough. We're picking our lost to Peterborough. We're playing some decent stuff. We got a gut punch there with the points deduction. And then I think the real turning point for this season was in September when we filed for administration. So that automatically guarantees a 12 point deduction on top of the other points deduction that we had. So it equaled up to 21. But then it came out how much we owed. We owed 60 million pounds, Derby County Football Club, 30 million pound tax bill. They hadn't paid the ambulance service. There was this long list of derelict bills that they hadn't paid, from paying for parking spots to paying for ambulances to paying for the photographer to take pictures, for all these different things. And I think it was just we knew it was bad. I don't think we knew it was this bad. And it was just really kind of felt like the Titanic was going down and no one was steering the ship, right? There was no one around. And the administrators came in and said, okay, well, we're hopeful of being able to conclude this takeover deal. They're reading reports right now currently as we record that, they may be naming a preferred bidder. It may be an American, it may not. We'll see how that shakes out. So the preferred bidder thing has been going on for a long time. They can't name a bidder, so they can't exit administration. You can't start another season in administration. You can only start one. The EFL wanted proof of funds. They couldn't give it. They threatened at one point to revoke our quote unquote golden ticket, which would automatically remove us from the league. We'd have to go into non-league football. There were threats there that we might be liquidated. There were threats that we might have to reform. There was a 40 or 50,000 person march before a game at Derby through the Derby City Center with waves in support of the club. There's been amazing fundraising efforts for our fans. So it's been incredible. I think one thing that this has done is this has put the fan base and the team of players, the squad of players, and I think the club, minus a few individuals at boardroom level, really a lot closer together, which they had really drifted apart during COVID because the club kind of went off the rails and everybody was just kind of drifting apart. And I think now we're a real collective group, and I think that that's going to be really good. But I think as a fan of a team, it's really hard. It's really disappointing when you don't know if you're going to have a football club to support, right? When the thing that you love most in your life could be taken away or not exist anymore. It's incredibly sad. It's frustrating. You feel powerless and helpless. I mean, I've had several sleepless nights. I've woken up in the morning thinking about it, like, 2:00 in the morning, like what's going on? There's nothing I can do. There's nothing any of us can do. We just have to sit back and wait. We've talked to a few journalists, like I said, and they don't know what's going on. They can't get answers from the administrators. So it's just a grotesquely complicated situation that hopefully that won't end anytime soon, because even if we get a bidder, it takes a while to exit administration and things like that. So it's frustrating. But that being said, the playing side of the house has actually been really, really good. We've exceeded expectations since the point deduction. They've really galvanized the squad. Although we've got like 23 players, they're all fighting for one another. They're showing some passion and they want to play for this football club. We haven't seen that from a Derby team in a long time. Derby's normally been a soft touch with a big pay packet. And so it's been really, really good to see, really, really good to see on the field. And like I said, we've got 6 games left to go. We're in with a shout of staying up. We went on a good run. We've had a bit of poor form. We picked up a victory at the weekend. We do have Fulham to play, so that's unfortunate for anybody at this stage of the season. But we've got 6 big games, and it's the championship, so you never know what's going to happen. And I'm just just crossing everything to make sure that we can get enough points on the board to be able to stay above that dotted line at the end of the day. And if that happens, it'll be one of the greatest achievements. It'll be a Leicester City-esque achievement for this football club to be able to stay in the championship, which sounds ridiculous, but when you take 21 points off the board for any team, I think they're going to struggle. And especially to be able to shout this late is phenomenal. So it's a bit of a mixed emotions all the way around.
Yeah. And you mentioned that it's kind of ridiculous to compare it to Leicester, but it really isn't, is it? Right? This is something that is unfathomable, right? If you think about it, 21 points, what do you need usually it's right about 30 something, 40 something points to stay.
I think we need
right?
4. I think 46 has generally been the watermark. And right now Derby would have 49 if they had the points back. So they would be theoretically safe. But yeah, I mean, it's absolutely incredible to say that we're in this situation April 4th, 6 games to go. We're still in with a fighting chance, having took 21 points off. I mean, it shows how crap the other teams are, but I'm not complaining at this point because we're in with a chance, and the longer you can stay in it, the more possibilities there can become for you.
For sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
I remember when Derby were relegated in March from the Premier League with 11 points. It was terrible. You had to play like 2 months of the season knowing you're relegated, and they were hopeless that season. But this season, they're putting up fight, and you want to stay in the fight as long as you can until somebody says, "Hey, this is mathematically impossible." I've got to believe that the possible is probable.
Oh, for sure. And you talk about it, right? You usually need 46. You lost 21. If you got the 46 plus the 21 that you got, you're sitting in third right now. That's how massive this sort of thing is. And on a lesser scale, but people don't really talk about this as much anymore now. It's a few years back, but this same thing happened in Columbus with the Crew. Now, again, not nearly to a larger extent, but you talk about how you guys all came together as a group. As a league, we kind of came together in this sense where Anthony Precourt tried to take the Crew and move them over to Austin before Austin became a thing. And it turned into this whole massive movement, hashtag save the Crew. And it wasn't just the Columbus team and the Columbus fans that were doing this. It was everybody in MLS who has basically made Precourt, public enemy number one. And they came together, they band together, they saved the Crew. They are able to make this happen. And then we move in and just 2 years after, or maybe just a year after, they go and win MLS Cup. It's a massive storyline that people never would have thought was going to happen. And again, not nearly on the level of what Derby has gone through this, but in terms of MLS, that is the closest thing we've gotten. And it's very, I won't say funny, but it's very cool kind of to see how that mimics. Maybe cool is not the right word either, but the fact that what you guys are going through and what they went through as well, it happens all over the world. So I just thought that was a really neat comparison there.
Yeah, for sure. We've seen clubs do that over the time, and I remember the Crew thing and whatever. So yeah, it's really interesting how the game mirrors one another from different continents and different eras. So it is very interesting. It'll be good to see. Hopefully we have the same success that the Crew does.
I'm pulling for it. But if Derby does go down, how do you think it'll affect the club? And can this still be considered a good season if they do go down?
I think it could still be considered a good season. I think next year we may get another 15-point deduction as well. So that would make it even more tough. It's not completely out of the woods. Obviously, League One makes the rebuild a lot tougher. It kind of depends on the transfer embargo, if that's lifted, if we're allowed to sign players. If we get a new owner in, what's the budget going to look like for us to be able to sign? Because right now we've got like 5 or 6 players on a contract. We're losing most of our young players for free. Rooney has come out and said that they need about 40 players for the first team, 23s and 18s in the offseason. Signing 40 players is really hard when you have money. If you don't have any money, it's going to be that much tougher. It'll be a really interesting summer. But I think, step one is to get this bidder named. Step two is to exit administration. And step three is to make sure that we have a Derby County for the future. And then we can worry about the playing staff when we need to worry about them. But I think the future of this football club is more important now than anything on the playing side, because we are theoretically, it's not going to happen. We're not going to get liquidated, but we are technically on a precipice. So when you're that close to something, you just want that to go away first before you can worry about the other things.
Couldn't agree more. Connor, is there anything else you wanted to talk about? I think that hits all of my points.
One thing I wanted to add on, just to add a little bit of extra support on this really being like on the level of Leicester City's run. Just to put it into a little perspective, you had mentioned that Derby, the season prior to this one, just barely avoided relegation. So if you were to take that same perspective to the Premier League, Burnley last season was the team that just avoided relegation. If you gave them a 21-point deduction this season, they're sitting on 0 points currently in the table. And they obviously would be well out of escaping relegation. They would be toast. So the fact that Derby are still fighting for this and in the mix to get out of relegation is just so incredible.
Yeah, I think we have like 28 points, I think, in Peterborough have 26, and we had a 21-point deduction. So, that coupled with the fact that we had an embargo with getting like cast off players, like our starting center halves were Curtis Davis at 35, Phil Jagielka at 38, and Richard Stearman at a sprightly 34. Like that was our defensive line until Jagielka left. We got Ravel Morrison, who's been around 18 clubs in 12 years. He's played the most games for Derby than he's played for any club in his career. He's not even played a full season. We've not had any loan players. We sold Luke Plange for $1 million. He got loaned back to us from Palace. So yeah, he's making it work with youth and cast-offs, and I don't know how it's doing, but whatever he's doing, it's magical. And yeah, that's a good stat. And I hope that we can solve it, because it's going to be a hell of a last day if we do it. I mean, it would be absolutely incredible. Last season was nail biting. Last season was scary, but this season, if we were to survive, I think it'd be as good as winning a cup, to be honest with you.
Absolutely.
I'd have to agree in that feeling. Yeah, that's it. I'm getting excited just thinking about it for you, and I have no ties to the club at all. So I'm with you. Cory, thank you so much for joining us. We have always wanted to sit down with somebody who's got ties to an overseas club and kind of talk MLS and how the overseas football community kind of sees us, and the fact that we were able to do it with somebody who's tied to this really crazy football movement in Derby right now, and the fact that they are doing what is quite easily seen as one of the most impossible things. Improbable. I'm going to call it improbable because it's definitely still possible. Is even better. So thank you so much for joining us.
No, Connor, Andrew, thank you. The pleasure's been all mine. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on here, talk about something that I'm passionate about with other people that are passionate about the same thing I am, be able to talk a little bit about Derby and a little bit about the MLS. You're really hitting my wheelhouse here. So I really appreciate it, Connor and Andrew, and appreciate the work that you guys do for your show and everything like that. And I hope we can catch up again soon.
Absolutely. For everybody listening, thank you so much for tuning in. This has been episode 20 of the Designated Players Podcast. Thanks again. Go check out Rams Review Podcast. One of the things we like to do is give you a minute or two to plug your socials and get people to follow you over on your side. So why don't you take a minute and tell people where to find you?
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, you can follow us on Twitter at Rams Review 1, my Facebook at Rams Review Pod, and we also have a normal page that you can friend called Rams Review, and we're on Instagram at Rams Review Pod as well. We're on all the major podcasting channels, and like I said, it's once a week, twice a week, as news breaks. So we've got always a lot of interesting conversations, and we've got a few different bits and bobs with different people from the industry as well, that we try to get into, take the veil off of the lens of get behind the game a little bit, take our Derby County hats off and just look at it from football fans. But yeah, if you're interested in Derby or this has piqued your interest, go on and check us out. We'd love to have you listen to us and get involved in everything like that. But Connor and Andrew, thank you so much for having me on and putting together such an amazing show week after week.
Cory, thanks for coming around and thanks for talking with us for a little bit. Thank you everybody for listening. Make sure you check us out wherever you get your podcasts, so you know when we go live. Check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Just search the Designated Players Podcast. You'll find us. And we will see you next time on the next episode of the Designated Players Podcast. See ya.